Good morning, good morning. We're seeing our participants log on. I'd like to welcome you for our session today. As you get situated, use this chat to drop in and tell us who you are, where you're from. I'm Carlin Madden. I'm the CEO of a nonprofit consulting firm called Good Insight. I am calling in from 8th Street Northeast. Would love to know who's in our room. Are you a nonprofit executive? Are you staff? Are you a board member? Are you from the community? Where are you located? What organizations are you with? So use that chat throughout the session. We'll be talking today about Ready for Recovery, which is a 4-part series that Serve DC has hosted that talks about how nonprofits and community-based organizations can build back stronger and more resilient. Super excited. This is the 4th in a 4-part series. And I'm super excited for this panel today, which we'll hear from nonprofit leaders from across the sector, from the arts to domestic violence to youth-based organizations. And we'll hear how they are investing in BIPOC communities. For those that aren't familiar with the term BIPOC, when we say BIPOC, we mean Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So you'll hear that term throughout the session. I'm going to walk us through a couple housekeeping tips as we get started. So today's session, please know that you're being recorded and that we are streaming this on Facebook as well. So if you have friends that want to log on, not through Zoom, but through Facebook, that they can watch along. So hello to all the Facebook folks out there. And that this session has closed captioning as well. So if that's a service that you need, that's available here. We ask that everybody that's joining in remain on mute. Our team in the background will mute folks. If you happen to pop on with sound, we have folks that are going to just go ahead and pop you on mute, but we ask that you stay on mute the whole time so that we can listen to our panelists. Thanks for those popping into the chat. Just as a reminder, would love to know who you are, where you're calling in from. Throughout the session, we'll have the opportunity to do Q&As. So we'll start off with a great panel of nonprofit leaders, and then we'll move into Q&A. The best way for us to do that is for you to pop your questions into the chat. Notice I'm talking a lot about the chat right now. Pop your questions into the chat as they come up, as you're hearing from these panelists, so that we make sure to get to your questions as soon as we can. After that, we'll go to a one-on-one with the director of Serve DC and a colleague of hers, and we'll do a Q&A following that too. So keep those chat questions coming. We also want to know who you are, where you're from on social media. So if there's something that one of our panelists talks about that really resonates with you, please use one of our event hashtags, or all of them. I think my social media colleagues would say all of our event hashtags for this. So R for R, Serve DC, and Ready for Recovery. And then finally, for those of you who have logged on Zoom and you're getting these Eventbrite emails, you're going to receive a post-event survey, which is super important for my colleagues at Serve DC to understand what went well and what can they do better and what else do you need from this organization. So couple housekeeping tips. So today's agenda, I'm going to walk you through a couple elements here. We're going to surprise we're here through welcome and introductions. We're going to launch into our panel discussion following opening remarks here. We're going to have a one-on-one discussion led by Director Aris T. Scales. Deputy Director Alexis Squires is going to come in and talk to us about events and initiatives hosted by Serve DC. And then closing remarks. So we have a great lineup today. I'm super excited to introduce to the next session. So for opening remarks, Commissioner Brandon Andrews. So Brandon Andrews was appointed by Mayor Muriel Bowser to chair the District of Columbia Commission for National and Community Service. Commissioner Andrews is an entrepreneur focused on technology, innovation, and digital strategies to build inclusive ecosystems for entrepreneurs of color. As a dedicated volunteer and civic leader, and chair of the Commission for National and Community Service here in DC, Commissioner Andrews oversees Serve DC's investments for community-based strategies and support for the city's AmeriCorps programs. So please join me in welcoming Commissioner Andrews to share some opening remarks.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much, Carlin, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I am Brandon Andrews, Chairman of the DC Commission for National and Community Service. We serve as the board for Serve DC, the Mayor's Office on Volunteerism and Partnerships. Part of our mission is serving alongside Eris and her team, ensuring they have the resources and support they need to support you, our nonprofit community in the DC area. Welcome to the fourth iteration of the Ready for Recovery series. These events, I think, have been incredible boons as organizations have sought to meet this incredible moment that we're in. We put together this programming to provide community-based organizations and civic leaders with the skills they need to make sure that their organizations can continue to serve the populations that they were serving before the crisis that we entered in, and that they can come out of this crisis perhaps even stronger than before. Today, we're going to talk about making strategic investments in community organizations with an eye on diversity and inclusion, ensuring that BIPOC populations have the resources they need to not just survive during a crisis, but to thrive and again, hopefully be better on the other side. Serve DC has been at the center of the city's response to the pandemic, at the city's response to calls for social justice as well. Perhaps there has been no better time in Serve DC's 20-year history, and it's the 20th anniversary, so congrats to Serve DC on 20 years. But there's perhaps been no better time that displayed the full breadth and depth of Serve DC's mission, as well as the significance of the impact, everything from receiving PPE donations, to coordinating volunteers, to training emergency responders, to facilitating the AmeriCorps grant program during the crisis, on top of providing a range of community grants to nonprofit and for-profit entities, small businesses as well, in the District of Columbia. Incredible, incredible work that again underscores Serve DC's central place in this community as a resource to not only folks that are in government and in the nonprofit sector, but even to some of our small businesses and first responders as well. It's an incredible honor for me to serve as chair. Service has been part of my life for my entire life. My grandmother raised me, was a teacher for 40 years, and by the time I had come along, she had retired, but she continued to serve her community by mentoring and by providing piano lessons and by even making loans to former students. That service piece was an incredible part of my upbringing, and I'm so happy to be able to continue to serve in this role. I'm looking forward to the incredible conversation today. I'm familiar with all the panelists and their organizations. Can't wait to hear how they've responded, and also how Serve DC and how the Commission can continue to be supportive of them and others. Thank you to Eris, to Alexis, to Whitney, and the entire Serve DC team for putting together this relevant programming. And last but not least, our AmeriCorps competitive grant program was just announced. If you're a nonprofit organization in the District of Columbia and you're interested in being a part of that grant program, I hope that you'll visit our website and fill out the application. I'm sure Eris and the rest of the team will share more about it. And I know we have attendees from across the nation and even from other places. There is a state commission in your state as well, if you're not in DC. And so definitely encourage your organization to apply for those AmeriCorps funds. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Carlin. Thank you again. And of course, I'll be around if anyone has questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Andrews. You highlight so many wonderful things that Serve DC has done as a central part of our community, and I encourage everyone to check out the work of Serve DC, and particularly if you're a local organization, seek out the resources that we have here on offer. So the next part, we're going to move into our community discussions here, and the next part I want to introduce everyone to Alexis Squires. And so first we're going to talk a little bit about today's focus and thinking about how, so the panel discussing really how are we using nonprofit leaders to discuss how they're actually, sorry, having a pause here. So we are going to start with a group of nonprofit leaders that are going to talk about how they are centering BIPOC communities in their organizations. And I think we know as organizational leaders, sometimes that becomes difficult in fundraising. And in this moment in time, fundraising is so important. We're going to discuss how accountability factors into all aspects of an organization's leadership, how we are holding ourselves accountable to the communities that we're serving. We're going to explore how these nonprofit leaders are thinking about how they're going to transform their fundraising initiatives. How are they centering the communities that they're serving as they make these appeals to their donors? And then finally, they're going to learn how to position their so you all as audience will learn how to position organizations that align investments and move the needle. So I think everyone can think about how their needle can be moved for their organization. It's my pleasure to introduce our next moderator for our conversation, our next conversationalist here, Alexis Squires. She's the Deputy Director of Partnerships Engagement for ServeDC, which is the Mayor's Office on Volunteerism and Partnerships. So she has held that role since March 2019. And here she's responsible for all the programs, partnerships, communications, and was the thought leader behind this series. She's a native Washingtonian, and she's committed to improving outcomes for the city's most marginalized communities. Please join me in welcoming Alexis, and she'll introduce you to the great panel that's yet to come.
Thank you so much, Carlin. That was such a lovely intro, and thank you to our Commissioner Andrews, for that warm welcome. I am incredibly excited to be before you today. We are excited. This is our fourth installment and our final installment of Ready for Recovery. And I have to say, I'm most excited about the conversation that I'm going to have. And that is no slight to our former guests and panelists and participants, because they all have been unique and dynamic. But I have to say, we designed Ready for Recovery to really, for this moment, really to be a value add to our nonprofit partners. And so what better way but to hear from some of the best that we have within our city. And I will do an intro of them in a moment. But first we will start with a poll, an audience poll. Yes, and the question is, with 5 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, how well does the nonprofit field support leaders of color? And that's going to be really critically important as we have this and kind of unpack this conversation that we're going to have today. Because we will be hearing from, as I mentioned, a dynamic group of leaders of color from our community who have been experiencing all that we've been experiencing, who have been navigating all that we have been navigating, both personally and professionally, and who are just equipped and to lead our communities, especially our underinvested communities, as we endure and navigate all that we are enduring and navigating, but then also as we recover. And so we want to get your input there. Okay, it looks like 42% are at 2, okay. How well does the nonprofit field support leaders of color? So we're at about the most at 42%, saying at about a 2, with 5 being the highest. Okay, that's good insight. So as we go through this panel discussion, I hope that you will learn more, you will grab insight about how we better support leaders of color. Again, we know that we are experiencing so much, and I'm call out that we're navigating COVID-19. We've been navigating that for the last, I had to do a count on my fingers, the last 6 months, if we count March as the beginning of that. And then we've had the social injustice, the civil unrest. And then I'm going to also call out the most recent for me is the verdict of Breonna Taylor. And so in that case, and so every time that these things are happening, I think it's fair to say that we've all been just navigating, kind of experiencing it in complex ways, and all of our personal and our professional is all merging together. And so I really am looking forward to hearing from these dynamic presenters and leaders to feel motivation first and foremost, and to hear how we better support those who are getting it right. And that is a meek a note of all of the leaders that I'm going to introduce to you in just a moment. And so without further ado, I'm going to start with the introductions. The first being Mr. C. Brian Williams. Brian is the founder and executive director of STEP Africa, which was founded in 1994. STEP Africa presents a percussive dance tradition of stepping to audiences here in DC. He is beloved and his organization is beloved, but also across the globe. Among many of his recognitions, Brian received the 2018 Mayor's Arts Award for visionary leadership from the DC Commission of Arts and Humanities.
Everybody.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us.
Nice to be here.
Nice to be here too. We will also hear from Mr. Darius Baxter. Good morning, Darius.
Is this the part where I cut my camera on and wave?
It is.
Hey, everybody.
But let me do your intro too, so people can know who we are going to be hearing from. Mr. Darius Baxter is the co-creator and CEO of Good Projects, which has the goal of bringing 500 families out of poverty by 2030. In his role, he works across sectors to generate support and to generate pathways of opportunity for underserved communities. Good morning.
The pleasure is all mine. Thank you so much, Ms. Squire. Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. And last but certainly not least, we are joined by Ms. Kube Gaje. Kube is the executive director of District Alliance of Safe Housing, or affectionately known as DASH, which is the district's largest housing provider to survivors of domestic violence. Earlier this year, she was awarded the Working for Community Award by NBC4, which recognized her leadership in the nonprofit sector. Good morning, Kube.
Good morning, Alexis. It's such a pleasure to be here.
It is a pleasure to have this panel. Can you look at you guys, first and foremost. Look at you, showing up as you always do. So we're going to get right into what I know folks are hoping to hear. And as I was writing my notes and preparing, I said, I want to make sure that this conversation that we have, and I'm sure that we will deliver, is both transparent and transformative. I want to make sure that our attendees and those who are joining us on Facebook Live, and we'll see this later, will really look to this discussion and say, first, wow, what we've already invested in dynamic leaders, but then, wow, like I heard some new insight that I really want to take and appreciate leaders, especially leaders of color, in a different and more intentional way. And then I'm going to be drawn to and motivated to support and show up differently to make sure that you all are supported and as you center the communities that you serve in really meaningful ways. So we'll jump in to our questions. And we're going to make it, I last time I said we're going to be podcast style. So please, feel free to just jump in and really be transparent so that we know that people are walking away with great insight. So the first question is, as nonprofit leaders that are serving centers.
I'm sorry, Ms. Squire. I don't mean to interrupt you, but Black is King was the greatest movie ever created. Okay.
Oh. See, this is how we're going to keep them engaged, right? Okay, Black is King, that is your opinion, and I thought it was dynamic too, but thank you for adding that. That's what I'm talking about. We're bringing the real, we're bringing it. Okay, so I'm going to ask the first question, and if you can loop this into your answer, then perfect. Okay, Darius, we've had so many significant shifts as a result of COVID, as a result of our reckoning of social injustice and civil unrest. Could you please highlight some of the intentional pivots that you've had to make, both personally and professionally, to show up and make sure that you are giving your best to your organizations and to your work? And Darius, since you know Black is King, let's start with you and how you've had to really make those pivots.
Certainly. I guess it's in my opening and apologizing if you hear any background noise, if you see little feet pitter patter behind me. So I'm sitting here today in Good Projects Learning Hub, which opened yesterday.
Nice.
We had a very clear goal for 2020 to be able to onboard 100 families into our family success plan to continue to move forward of our goal of transitioning 500 families out of poverty that are living here in the Southwest community by the year 2030. Obviously, with COVID, it's very hard to get those numbers in one specific space. But with DC making the announcement that they were going to be going virtual for this first semester, we knew that we had to do something. For us, we want to make sure that we're always supporting the entire family. And there's not one person on this panel, and assuming that there's not one person that is listening in today that doesn't understand the need of our Black and brown children, not just here in DC, but around the country. The learning loss that our children face was already significant before COVID. And then we saw with COVID, we had a spring where students got the school year cut short, and then the fall where they were expected in many ways, and as we've seen even over the last 2 days, to fend for themselves with the assistance of teachers that were trying to figure out this new norm themselves. So for us, it was not an option if we needed to do something. It was almost a mandate. We have a community that we're committed to, and we had students that needed to learn. And we were willing, and by the grace of God, we have a group of supporters, both at the DC government level and at our funding level, that believe in investing in young people at the middle school and elementary school age. So we're not making that investment as the work we've done in the past at the juvenile justice system level when they become adults. Mm-hmm. So for us, it's making sure that we're supporting these students from 8 to 4 p.m., getting them through their school, making sure that they're engaged, being that support for the schools that I think even every parent on this call would appreciate at this moment in time. But for us, it's just being here for our youth and families at the Learning Hub today. That was our pivot.
Wow.
But I'm interested to actually hear some of these other.
No, I was just going to say that was a significant, so this was a program that you, obviously couldn't have thought of, but you kind of went into action based on, the present kind of circumstances.
Had to. For us, obviously, we have a multi-year strategic plan that will continue along, but in this time, COVID requires innovation. Every single day you have to be innovating. Things are happening, things are changing. DCPS announced, I want to say about 2 weeks before the start of the school year, that we were going virtual, and immediately we started planning and putting this together. But that's just a testament to DC government. For the space that we're in now is a DC Housing Authority building. We have a DPR park. We're funded by the out of school time office. Just as quickly as we've been innovating, DC has been reacting and showing support for us as an organization. So, let's just keep up the momentum.
Nice. Okay. Kube, did you want to address that question?
That's a big question. Pivots personally and professionally. I'll start personally and then go to the professional piece. For those in the audience who may not know, DASH is the largest safe housing provider for survivors of domestic and sexual violence. And so we sit squarely in providing services for survivors who need housing. And the work we do is incredibly traumatic as we help survivors untangle the sometimes multi-generational trauma that they've experienced in order to be and to have the life that they want to have. And so because the work we do really is hard work. It's a lot of working with people who are not having the best of days, and COVID in many ways expose some pre-existing inequities, not just pre-existing, gaps in our social services. And for organizations like DASH who are at the front line, we never closed our doors. We didn't have that option. And so as the leader of the organization, when it first broke, our staff had an all staff meeting planned, all staff retreat planned. I remember the day because it was March 15th, which is my sister's birthday, and my birthday was on March 16th. And I had to decide whether or not we would actually go ahead and have our all staff retreat. And I'm so grateful that we did, because that day away in community with each other and just hitting the pause button to celebrate and acknowledge the incredible work that everybody does gave us the momentum that we needed to power through some of the worst days in March and April. And so personally, I really had to take some time to, and it was not much, it was about 20 or 30 minutes to prepare myself for the storm that was coming. Because at the end of the day, most of what we do at DASH is serve as emotional containers. And so I had to lean into my support system and ask them to hold me up, to be the leader that DASH needed me to be during these times. As an organ, and I also had to cry. I cried quite a bit. I've cried quite a lot in the last couple of months, more than I ever have in my entire life. Every single one of my staff members has been in meetings with me when there's been mascara running down my face, just as we tackled all of what we do. Professionally as an organization, we immediately pivoted to shifting our staff to a adjusted remote and in-person schedule. DASH owns the largest housing program for survivors, our Cornerstone program, which has 42 units for survivors in the city, where we welcome survivors and are able to house them for up to 2 years at no cost to them. DASH was also one of the first domestic violence housing agency to have a positive COVID case in late March. And so we learned very quickly how not to panic. To Darius's point, it required innovation and agility in rethinking how we deliver services in the middle of a pandemic. And so we immediately shifted to having our building moving from cleaning services in the building from 3 days a week to 7 days a week, making sure that our security team was aware of what needed to happen while staff were not in the building. It's a delicate balance for us between safety and ensuring a welcoming space for survivors. And so our staff really had to think about, how do you do this virtually? Because a lot of what we do is based on interpersonal relationships and building trust. As soon as this happened with the pandemic, we started to see as much as 4 times the number of survivors reaching out to DASH for resources. And so we were just sort of girding ourselves for what was to come. Taking care of ourselves. Everybody talks about self-care, and there's a different definition for it for every single person. But really spending the time with team members. We instituted, our senior management team met every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for 3 or 4 months to make sure that the teams were taken care of, that they had the supports they needed to support their teams. Our board banded together and got gift cards. I think it was not Uber Eats, the other one.
DoorDash. Okay.
For
not in a limb.
Thank you, for our frontline staff, so that they wouldn't have to worry about, I'm running 500 miles an hour. When am I going to have time to stop and get food for myself and for my family? And so the little things like that, and even as recently as 2 or 3 months ago, because of the incredible weight of what we do, the organization invested in providing a full year's worth of headspace accounts for all of our staff. Nice. In order to provide them literally the headspace, another resource that they could use and support each other. So it has been quite a journey, but that innovation and agility remains at the forefront for us. We've also had to thankful the city has been incredibly supportive. The Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants, Department of Human Services. Even despite the pandemic, we have launched a brand new youth program serving youth survivors ages 18 to 24 with an additional 20 units of transitional housing services in the building. So lots to do, lots more to come, but we're doing everything we can to be there for each other and for the survivors in our care.
Nice. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm just going to call out a few things that I'm hearing that are consistent with Darius, and then I'm going to pivot to you, Brian, but agility and innovation. And then I heard, the partnerships, the leaning in and collaborating. So Brian, if you could share a little bit more about your experience and how you have had to pivot professionally, personally. It's all one and the same in this moment. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I'll be brief, but good to be here with everybody. One thing that's clearly a reminder in this moment is that in spite of the pandemic, COVID-19, and the challenges and the I guess the pandemic of historic inequity being exposed, that people have to keep serving, right? And that's what I'm hearing from the panelists, is that we don't really have an option to stop serving, to stop doing the work that's so important to us, in spite of the challenges. And that has been the case for Step Africa as well. And I think, for all of my nonprofit brothers and sisters who are out there, our mission makes us move through this pandemic in a very different way, right? Because the bottom line is we cannot stop. Our mission is to kind of keep driving us in spite of all the changes and how you work. And, clearly what we're hearing today is that we can't stop working. For Step Africa, we were in the middle of a successful run off Broadway, performing in New York, touring all over the world, serving children and communities with our performances. To my arts organizations out there, we were really at the height of an amazing year. We were actually in New York when the lights went down on Broadway. So our show had to close. And so the pivot for us was, how do we maintain our mission when, as artists and as theaters and practitioners who specialize in social gathering, now we're in an age of social distancing and our main venue has been eliminated. So that meant really, but we know that we still need to serve our community, that art matters to people and we need to be present to our communities, to our families, to our children. So Step Africa aggressively embraced the digital platform and started to create as much as we could for that platform, many times it being free for the community, to keep engagement. And it's been wonderful to see our audiences expand and engagement deepen as we just sought to serve them in whatever way that we could. Last thing I'll say is Step Africa is one of the largest in the region employers of full-time African-American artists of color. Artists of color in general, African-American artists, artists of color. So during this time, we kind of doubled down on our artists. In spite of losing over $1 million plus in revenue from all the touring that we had planned for this time period. And I gotta say to the DC government for steering us through this with their support, with their grants. But I hope we'll talk also for our nonprofits about what we need to do to broaden those bases of support as we move through this pandemic and come on the other side. Because I think all of us deserve not only to lean on our amazing government, and I'm so glad we have a responsive government that hears organizations of color and supports us, but we need to start to access the other wealth that exists in the community that is pretty large, what I'm hearing, and activate them to get behind organizations that may not have traditionally served in the past. So
Nice, thank you.
The pivot continues.
Yes, it does. And so you mentioned something that is going to really be a good segue into our next question about being present, right? We've named COVID-19, we've named all of the social injustice and civic unrest that we have been experiencing. How did each of you remain present? And you're not just, it's not like you can just show up to work, right? You all don't have the luxury to just show up. You really have to be people are looking to you as the leaders of these organizations, communities are looking to you. How did you, are you taking in all of these things that I said are affecting us in complex ways, physically, emotionally, spiritually? You're sad. Kube, you mentioned, at moments you've had to cry. How have you taken all of this in and still remain present? And still worked on the vision that you have for your organizations? I would really like to hear that. You all are doing a lot of innovative things. How are you managing all of that?
I can start with that one. It's a big question too. So how do you stay present? And I think for every person, every leader, it's different because of depending on their organization's composition. I think for me, it has been really leaning into the strength and vulnerability, but then also standing in my truth. A big takeaway for me from the pandemic has been just, I said to my team yesterday, I'm much more unapologetic about the changes that need to be made. DASH is an organization led by a woman of color, with a staff of predominantly Black and Brown, serving predominantly people of color. And, domestic violence became a pandemic of its own as survivors were trapped indoors for months with abusers. We had a survivor whose abuser came home because he had been furloughed, and she, had to be extracted. We also then had another survivor who's held at gunpoint. We're seeing higher lethality. We've lost survivors to violence, several survivors over the last couple of months. And so how do you be present in that midst? For me, I am really mindful of acknowledging and being transparent about the fact that I do not have all the answers, reaching out to the folks who do support us, my board, our staff, the leadership within the staff. And then also, being very transparent again about the things that we do well, and being able to leverage those resources on an ongoing basis. And I love Brian's question and really call to action of what's happening. How do we leverage the resources outside of our government? We still have a lot to do on the government front, and our DC has been an incredible support system for many, many organizations. And so has the private sector, with the organizations and foundations really making organizations led by people of color a priority, releasing most of the restrictions on grants over the years, but there's still a lot of work to do. And so we are asking everybody, I'm personally asking everyone to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and being present in the moment, knowing that the moment may be different every single day. And it's going to require a different strength of yours as a leader, whether that's looking at your finances to say, well, do we have enough for the next 3 months? Or what do your staff need? And what do the population you serve need?
Okay. Darius, would you like to comment on that one?
Certainly, and I started laughing when you asked that question, because I think that for obviously most of the people on this panel, and then actually all of the people on this panel, and then assuming, if you have the time to get on this call in the middle of the day, you're managing something and somebody looking up to you, like, you got to have a strong sense of self. Like during this time, everybody, it seems like it was so long ago, but I remember when this thing first hit, there was a lot of uncertainty. And I remember coming on to these Zoom calls, first trying to get everybody acclimated to what Zoom was and Google Meet and Teams, and like, okay, decision, which one are we going to use? All right, we're going with Zoom. And then from there, you got to, to your point, I can't just show up. I can't just show up and like, all right, I'm gonna have my camera off. I'm just gonna be talking. Let me roll out of bed. Before we got on this call, Brown was talking about he was finishing his cereal. You can't let people see all that. And it's just being, we can talk about nonprofit, but let's just talk about leadership. In this moment in time. Sometimes, and my mom always said it growing up, sometimes you got to fake it till you make it. I had no idea what we were gonna do when COVID first hit. And anybody that says they knew what they were going to do was a bold-faced lying straight through that, or straight through the Zoom call, whatever we want to say. But, at the end of the day, I'm a believer through and through. And I firmly believe that God is always going to have me exactly where I need to be. This call is a perfect example. And I just stayed steadfast, put my head down, and just continue to pray, like, God, what would you have us to do in this moment? And In my own life, I think that God often speaks to me through the people closest to me. And in this moment in time, everybody had something that we should be doing. And I listened to some of it, didn't listen to other ones, but the direction was pointed right in front of us. And I was like, this is the way that we're going to go. And of course, you got your naysayers, everybody from your funders to staff that think they know better than you. You the whole gambit, you know. But at the end of the day, to the point that was just made, you know, it's something that Doc Rivers actually said. As a leader, first you got to have a strong sense of self. I want to reiterate that. But then you have to break it down to your team. Look, guys, I'm human. I'm gonna make mistakes. I probably make a mistake every single day. You might not know all of them, but I'm gonna make mistakes. But I guarantee you that every decision that I make is for the greater good of this team. And in my case, when we lose, it's not just, all right, we lost the basketball game. In my case, when we lose, somebody might die. And that's a lot of pressure. So at the end of the day, knowing that, waking up every morning, knowing that when my feet hit the floor, that the first thing that I'm thinking about is the youth and families that call Good Projects home, makes decisions a lot easier because I know I'm operating with the best of intentions. I know you can follow me on Instagram. This isn't a shameless plug, I promise, but you'll see my story this morning. I woke up at 3:30 this morning excited just to have the opportunity to be able to come down and work with these young people. That is a blessing. Just think about my life. Oh my God. I'm 27 years old and I get paid I make a living off of trying to help others. I would do this for free. I'm not saying cut my funding, but I'm just saying like there's no greater joy in the world. And you're operating with the intention that no matter what I do, I know I'm going to have an impact. I'm going to make somebody's life just a little bit better. There is no wrong decision. You know, it might not be the one that gets the most attention. It may not be the one that has the greatest amount of impact, but at the end of the day, it did something. Somebody's life is just a little bit better than it was the day before. So, you know, strong sense of self and just like keep moving forward, man. Everybody got haters. You just got to use them as fuel, like just fan your flame, you know?
Nice, nice. I agree. I agree. If you can make that impact and you know that you're going to make that impact that day, that is always a great motivator. Brian, I'm going to come back to you because you raised something and we're going to move on to another question. And I think all three of you have raised, but you so eloquently, Brian, about, you know, your funders, your supporters, and how do we show up? How do we want our board members who are our, you know, frontline for us, for you as leaders, our supporters, our staff? How do you best in this moment, in this critical moment where you're having to make these critical decisions about how your sustainability of your organizations, how do you best feel supported? And you can take that, you know, that support however you want. You know, is it conversations or is it affirmations? But also really thinking about financially. How do you want your supporters to really support you? Your financial donors to support you in a moment like this. And I'm going to lay one more layer on top of that, especially in this climate of really wanting to ensure that we are all being equitable. That's been thrown out there a lot, but how do you want people to show up to support you? And Brian, I'm going to hand that over to you, a loaded question.
Well, I think that for all of us here, we recognize that we can't do the work that we want to do every day without a staff, a team. You know, I don't know the size of the nonprofits that are watching today. You know, I'm sure it ranges, right? But what this moment has really told me is that, your team is so important. For me, the artists, I mean, like I said, we already mentioned how important they are to STEP Africa as an arts organization. You know, so keeping them employed and keeping them engaged was paramount for me, because I knew I could not serve if my team did not stay together. And I think that's been a huge challenge in this pandemic, is how do nonprofits within this age of furlough and unemployment, how do we keep together our team to do the work? Because without the team, you can't do the work. And that's for any business, not just, I mean, a nonprofit is a business at the end of the day, correct? So it has to operate and serve. So I think to the donors, to the foundation, that was always paramount for me, because through the team, I could serve. If I don't have the team, it's impossible to serve. And I'm sure for the other panelists here that some preservation of the staff was essential in order to be able to deliver to the community that is most in need, right? So I think that is the message. You know, I've become really kind of aggressively artist-centered, staff-centered, mission-focused always, but recognizing that the mission is implemented by the team we put in place. So to donors, to my board, to individual donors, which I really want to see give more to organizations of color going forward. I love institutional donors like foundations and of course the government, but allow organizations of color to build the type of staff and structure, support, I shouldn't say allow, let's take that word out. Provide the support to organizations of color that allow them to build the systems and staff where they can duplicate already tremendous efforts that are being done, okay? Because we've been doing a lot with very little for a long time. And awakening and this acknowledgement of structural and racial inequities in terms of distributions of funding and whatnot has got to change so that we can really do this work that I'm so proud to hear what these two panelists are doing here, right? And I know there's so many more in the chat, right? So.
Nice.
Brian, if I could reach out and just, yes.
Go ahead, you can do it. You can reach out.
Yes. So I will add to what Brian has said. It's so important. I think every single nonprofit leader and nonprofit leader across the world, but specifically our leaders of color, it has been studied and proven that organizations that are led by people of color receive lower levels of funding consistently. And if and when they do get funding, there are higher restrictions on those funding, right? So when Brian said allow organizations of people who are led by people of color to do the work that they do, I think it is changing the mindset in the philanthropy world, that if nonprofits, especially nonprofits led by people of color, serving people of color, go away, it will cost our system, our society, so much more to do that work, because then you are not in the community. And so for our private sectors, Dash was incredibly honored to have, since the pandemic, brought on over 500 new individual donors who helped us reach those goals, foundations and private sectors, private funders who are now, again, removing some of those restrictions of, we want you to give us your firstborn child all the way through your grandmother's last name in order for me to give you $5,000. Let's talk about that. Is that really necessary? No. Trust the organizations to do what they do best. And when people ask me all the time, what can we do? Yes, give us all, like, we want you to be invested in our mission and to do this work. But most importantly, fund these organizations so they can multiply impact. And that capacity building, you cannot invest solely in program. You have to invest in everything else that makes the organization run. You have to invest in finance. You have to invest in fundraising. You have to invest in systems building. So like, that work takes time, and yes, it costs money to make money. And if you don't provide platforms for organizations to do this work in the way in which their organizations need to do them through flexible funding, you are sucking the lifeline away from the communities, the very communities we're all fighting to save.
And I think in this moment, I would actually want to applaud. A woman that I think that a lot of us on this know, new director of the Greater Washington Community Foundation, Tonia Wellens. We're going to be announcing a partnership with them today. I'll have to, I think our communications director might be on the team. He's probably texting me like, don't do it. But so we're going to be providing $30,000 grants to 10 activists in the Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia area for these exact reasons. And I think that Tonia and her team recognize, as this pandemic shown that the Black Lives Matter movement continue, that we do need to invest in the leaders themselves. And we're honored as an organization to be able to work with them in that. And I would encourage not just the panelists, but anybody that's listening in today in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area to apply for the Justice Fellowship. But no, you all are 100% spot on. You know, can imagine as a young guy myself getting started in this city, I love what you said, Kube. The first child all the way to the grandmother for $5,000, and when you're getting started, I think that's the most amount of money in the world. Like, oh my gosh, it's $5,000. Then you realize the insurance to cover the program might cost that much, you know. And at the same time, we have to continue to challenge ourselves. And this might not be popular, but I have to say it on this call, is that we increase our mindsets for ourselves. You know, this is something that I'm talking to my team about right now. We had a development call about 2 weeks ago, and they're talking to me about grants they're applying for $10,000, $15,000. I said, y'all don't need to call me no more about these. They're like, what do you mean? Like, we need to talk about it. I said, this is a waste of my time. If the grant isn't $250,000 or above, don't call me. And they were like, what? And then a week later, they came back to me with a list of 10 grants for $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. And I told them that's where I'm looking at our organization at. You know, they're out there for us. They are. We just have to think higher ourselves. To your exact point, I'm not running in circles for nobody for $5,000 no more. I appreciate it. You know, support our work, but you're not doing me a favor. And this is, I applaud one of my mentors. His name is Jesse Dillon, amazing dude. He continues to coach me on this. You know, we go into this work with this mentality as if people are doing us favors when they're giving us money. But exactly what you said, Kube, who would be servicing these kids if we weren't here? You know, do I need to walk up to somebody groveling to ask them to be of service to the least of our community? No. People should want to invest in our work. People should want to support people that are willing to give up their time, their treasure, their youth for the betterment of others. You know, we have to, in many ways, we have to shift our own mindsets. Nobody's doing us a favor. They are doing their, and that's what I love about this Black Lives Matter movement and what it's doing in this moment. It's because Black people are realizing, we're realizing our own kingship and our queenship, and realizing that we don't just have whole communities behind us, we have whole kingdoms behind us of folk. And at the end of the day, we can do everything from change councils to change entire communities when we have the folk behind us, and we've been had that. So, you know, again, this might not be the most popular thing, but I got to say it. We have the power. We have the ability to go out and get the $1 million, $2 million, $4 million, $40 million institutional investments like everybody else. But we have to see ourselves in those spaces. And I challenge each and every person that's listening on this call to start to see themselves in those spaces. Because if you're doing this work, regardless of what it is, don't let anybody tell you ain't got the documents. Don't let anybody tell you need this, you got it, because you're doing the work.
Nice.
And if you need some help with it, reach out to us and we'll be there for you to put it together.
Okay. Guys, I could stay here and talk to you all day, literally, but we are needing for time to go to another dynamic conversation. But what I'm hearing, and before we you know move on, thank you, first of all. Thank you for the passion, for the intentionality that you have, for the grace, for the visions. And I think overwhelmingly what we're hearing is trust leaders of color, trust your vision, trust your insights, your pivots, how you show up personally, professionally, trust us and support us, and see and take a hold of the vision that you have and run with it. And so we just thank you again for being with us today. Thank you for the work. Thank you for how you center your communities that you serve. And we wish you nothing but the best. We Serve DC is here always to be your public partner. And we look forward to the great things that you are doing. You know, Darius, give our good, you know, vibes to the students that you're working with today. Kube to your residents, and Brian to your audiences that you on a digital platform. Thank you for all that you're doing within our community.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alexis.
Thank you,
All
guys.
right. I am going to turn it over to our Chief Service Officer, Ms. Eris T. Scales, who is going to have another dynamic one-on-one conversation. Eris, I hope that you take all of the energy and insight and just fuel it to your conversation.
Why, thank you so much. Let me tell you, I'm moved. My heart is actually racing right now after that panel discussion. And so much of what I thought I was going to talk about, I may not even talk about. So Tysley, I'm giving you pre-warning. I don't know where we're going to go with this, but I'm feeling moved by what we just experienced. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you, Deputy Director Squire. I am really thrilled at this point to be joined by an amazing colleague of mine, and just a great mover and shaker and innovator in the fundraising world, the not-for-profit world. Ms. Tysley Williams, are you on screen to join me?
Yes, Eris.
Hey. Welcome. So I could read your bio, but we have one, we're pressed for time. Two, we all have the power of our fingers to Google and look folks up. But I do want to introduce you in this way. Okay, so I hope this was funny. So last night, and I won't say who said it, but I was, to Darius's point, he's like, I could roll out of bed and blah, blah. I was feeling some kind of way. I'm like, I am exhausted. I am delirious. I have been doing like 16-hour jobs. I'm just not ready. I don't know what I'm gonna do tomorrow. And this unnamed source said, Eris, you're speaking with Tysley. She could talk to a wall and raise money, right? So you guys will be fine. And I laughed so hard. And I thought that was like the biggest compliment to how well you do in this space. And we know that fundraising is something that we all need as nonprofit leaders, but it's also one of those things, as we've heard, is a huge challenge. It's a challenge because people are intimidated. They don't necessarily know the techniques or the tactics. They don't have the relationships. Priorities are always changing. So I want to be able to just kind of delve a little bit today around, trends, tactics, some techniques, things that our audience today can take away and begin to think about as nonprofit leaders, but also how we can challenge our philanthropic leaders and donors to think a little differently about how they're supporting our work.
Yes, Eris. Well, let me begin by thanking you for the invitation, as well as Commissioner Andrews and the Honorable Mayor Muriel Bowser. I also want to thank our panelists, and what an incredible job they did. I am just so incredibly appreciative just to occupy space with them. And so I am excited, sis, to talk about relationship building and to talk about it in a way that is intentional, that is rooted in equity, and one that will hopefully provide some tactical tips. Done a little bit of homework, Eris, so that I'm hoping that some of what we showcase today will also be data informed.
That's right. That's right. Because you're going to be asking me a couple questions too, I think, right?
Yes, this is a relationship.
Okay.
Eris. This is a give and a take. And so I'm going to shed some insight on my thoughts and perspective. And then, Eris, we are going to hear your thoughts and perspective, because you are sitting in a place of influence, connected to power. You have the ability to educate and inform all of us. And so we are also here to learn from you. So get ready, get ready.
Get ready, get ready. Okay, let me get my notes out. So can we jump in? Can I start asking some questions and picking your brain?
What's on your mind today? Absolutely. I know we're on this road to recovery.
We are on a road to recovery.
Yeah,
we are on a road to recovery. So, I was sitting here thinking, so some of my takeaways, just listening to the first panel of amazing leaders, and how vulnerable they were and transparent they were in sharing where they are, I think personally and professionally, and the consideration that they're taking as it relates to their teams feeling, empowered and engaged and connected as they continue to pivot to the work. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about is this. So we have our nonprofit leaders, and I've been looking at the chat too, where, it started to come up around this need to support our organizations in terms of their leadership, capacity building, systems. And we're in this state right now where it's a lot of heightened dialogue, a lot of heightened consciousness with new audiences, new friends and allies around racial inequality and social justice. But when I look at the work that these organizations have been doing, not just the three that were featured here, we've been about that, right? It just wasn't termed that, right? So the mission of that work in and of itself is addressing social inequalities. And so now we have donors and funders who are coming around and labeling it that way. So wanting to hear from you, as we're in this state, what role is philanthropy playing? How are they pivoting? And is it even fair, now for them to now say we're funding racial equity work? It's like, did you not realize you were doing that before? So,
yes.
Yeah.
So Eris, I will start by saying that clearly, Brian and Kube, as well as Mr. Baxter, they are not new to this. They are really true to this, right? I'll also begin by saying there is ample space and opportunity for those of us who have been true to this to make room for those that now want to be new to this. I say that because philanthropy has always been personal. Commissioner Andrews started talking about what he learned as a young man by watching a caring adult, his grandmother, instill values within him. And now this service creates an opportunity not only for him to do good, but to honor his grandmother and to connect to values that matter and that are meaningful to him. That is what we do in the social good space. We create space and opportunity, not for donors to give, but for donors to get something in return that cannot be given through transfer of money. The feeling that I get, that you get, that Kube gets, that Brian gets, when we are able to invite people into a space where the beneficiary isn't just those that are quote unquote in need of, but the beneficiary is also the donor who is in equal need and could not receive if there were not an opportunity to give.
That's right.
So with that perspective, we are stepping into inclusiveness in a very real way. And so if you are about the mission, and if you are about what we have determined is the best way to achieve this mission, with people of color leading, with people of color being on boards, if you are okay with taking what was traditionally held power and recognizing that power within itself is not necessarily a good or bad thing, but the use of your power determines and qualifies whether or not it's good or bad. So if you're willing to step into a space where we can talk about recalibrating power and you can understand what it means to be a faithful follower, you're welcome.
Absolutely. Oof, that was, now you giving me chills. So you better preach, okay? The use of that power. And so as we think about, the philanthropic community and these donors who have the power of the purse, right? The power of the coin. And we're now in this moment. And we were asking a couple weeks back, we had Edward Jones, we had Timmy Bennett, we had Aish from Bright Meyer. And we're like, is this a temporary thing? Is this just a fad? And so if we double down and we start to really talk about power and we look at philanthropy, where do we think philanthropy will go? Like, will it build off of this? Is this just a moment now? Or will it become business as usual? I don't know, so what do you think? What are you seeing? What are you sensing?
So I think we are evolving. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to look, on this road to recovery, which we are collectively on. I'm going to look a little bit in the rearview mirror to give us some perspective on where I think we're heading, okay? So when we found ourselves faced with the pandemic, like many people leading not-for-profit organizations, I looked to say like, hey, where are we going to be able to find the necessary resources, right? We knew that there was likely going to be a decline in individual giving, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about what we now know, the impact of that. And so Deloitte had an RFP on the street. They were inviting not-for-profit organizations to apply, and it was COVID-specific funding. And this was really interesting, Eris. When I went to the eligibility section, guess what? Individuals could apply, right? They were inviting institutions, individuals, companies, anyone who had a solution for what could and would work. In the spirit of inclusiveness, they were invited. So no longer do you qualify by being in 501c3. The eligibility had extended. So here's where we're going. I want to talk a little bit about B Corps, benefit corporations. There are over 1,200 in the US. And a B Corp is essentially a purpose-driven, for-profit corporation. It was created to benefit all stakeholders, not just shareholders. It believes that the change that they want to seek in the world is driven by the creation of this entity. And it essentially believes that business ought to be conducted as if people and place mattered. Now, doesn't that sound like a 501c3, like content and message? And it's like, oh,
sounds like it to me. Yes.
That's a B Corp. So here's where we're moving. We are moving to being able to sustain yourself based upon what works. Not-for-profit organizations have got to shift really quickly. We've got to start collaborating instead of competing, right? We've got to invent and innovate. So we've got to put new stuff into market and make the things that are already in market better. And then we've got to seek to put ourselves out of business. If you are just coming back year over year over year over year, and you are not speaking to me about how you are eradicating and eliminating the root cause,
that's right.
You need to reconfigure your approach. And so we're moving in a direction, Eris, where it is going to be critically important, no matter how your company or your not-for-profit is organized under legislative laws and the name, people now care about what works.
That's right. That's right. And that's actually a good kind of transition into what are you seeing by way of funders now for how they are looking to measure whether, which I even cringe a little bit asking this question, because it's like how funders are going to measure whether or not you as a nonprofit who's been mission driven and community focused and about addressing these social inequalities, you know, but again, they're coming up with how they want to measure your success, right? And so I am leading with, I am not taking away from what our nonprofit leaders and organizations have already been doing and defined as. But when it comes, but I do want them to be competitive. I want them to be in alignment to be able to secure funding. This question is really around, you know, from the perspective of donors, how are they now qualifying and quantifying whether or not you are executing upon racially equitable outcomes and programming and agendas? Like, what are some things you're seeing? Are they looking at boards? Are they looking at, you know, what kind of indicators?
Yeah, Eris. So I'm gonna talk about 3 measures of success where I think most foundations and companies where they look. But just to extend your point, I will say to all not-for-profit organizations, we're about to talk about contributed income.
That's right.
Right? It is critically important for your sustainability to also have earned income, so that everything Eris was introducing about, well, we're stepping into a place and we're having to speak to their rules and we're having to justify based upon what they deem appropriate. What is an earned income? Eris and I both support the Girl Scouts. Y'all know Girl Scouts knock on your door, they ask you to buy cookies. The Girl Scouts are giving you cookies but through the purchase of that product, the fee from the cookie goes back to support the advancement of the Girl Scouts. That revenue stream enables the Girl Scouts and the model of the Girl Scouts to continue, and that is separate and apart from contributed income. So we're gonna all start thinking about how do we shift our sole reliance on contributed income. So now that we've made that right-hand turn and we are talking about contributed income, the majority of measures that you see, they're the ones that I would consider to be board composition, equity statements, leadership role. But here's the deal. More often than not, those are introduced as what I call your floor, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I am encouraging us to seek a way to differentiate ourselves from people who are merely counting, right? Someone says, talk to me about your board composition. If the only thing you do is to literally count and to put the number down without extending that and providing insight on how those bodies lead to a transformative approach that's connected to the mission, right? And so it's not just reporting on numbers. It's being able to create a narrative and a message that demonstrates, because of the presence of diversity, I am better positioned to do the work that I'm doing. This is attributing to my competitive advantage. This is contributing to my superpower. And so the one piece that I want to say is, yes, we're measuring what matters, but I want us to make sure that we are introducing a narrative that doesn't just stop at the floor. We really want to interject and to speak to, Eris, what is an elevated and an increased, not only expectation, but a necessity. So if you are not diversifying racially and culturally, you are not meeting the needs of your community, you are not innovating, and you are slowly proving to be an organization that is not going to be able to retain financial support.
That is so true. I mean, the traditional ways of securing and raising money are, I mean, even before COVID, just don't exist. And I've always been a big advocate for nonprofits to determine ways to bring in additional revenue. And I said, you know, just because you're a not-for-profit does not mean that you cannot have services, programs that you offer and receive funding for in a different kind of way. And that's one of the things I do value about our approach in DC government. We have different ways in which we fund and support organizations, right? So we do have direct grants, but some of our agencies, you know, utilize nonprofits as service providers. That's and right. You are compensated as technically almost like being a business. And so not being afraid to look at how you start to scale and diversify your service delivery, I think is a super critical point for nonprofits and not-for-profits to take into consideration. And I could talk about that all day too. And I think that, you know, the last thing I'll say, and you started to touch on it, I am really big as well on narrative.
Yes.
I think, you know, for so many of us, we are doing the work. Mm-hmm. And we've got our head to the ground. And as Darius said, like he's happy to just, he loves it, right? He's like, I feel honored to be able to come and serve this community. But he also does a really great job at marketing and promoting good projects. So I'm gonna give him that. But many of us have our head down, we're doing the work, and we're not taking the time to share that narrative, to tell that story, to connect it back to our amazing impact. And that's important. So, you know, what recommendations, because I'm sure you have not raised over $100 million for these national organizations and even at the hyper-local level without having, you know, good data, good narratives, and strong relationships, right? So how do you build that time in? What are some techniques that you would recommend to organizations now as we're navigating through COVID? Because it looks different. It looks different.
Absolutely. So, I'm going to center our mission. So at America's Promise Alliance, we build external relationships so that we can inspire, engage, and unite individuals, institutions, and communities to create conditions where every young person in America can succeed. And so, taking into account we are in the midst of a pandemic, I'm going to tell you what we are doing, and I'm hoping that this will be useful for all of the listeners. So I am starting with what I consider to be a realistic perspective on what is unfolding in the world. So since COVID, 1.6 million people in the not-for-profit sector have lost their jobs. That base represents some of the most philanthropically generous individuals giving within the US. So your service providers, your teachers, your firemen, those individuals give at a higher proportion than individuals who are wealthy. Individual giving, Eris, has declined 6% in the first quarter. And if it continues, we're looking at roughly about a $25 billion loss in revenue.
Wow.
So taking into account, people are dealing not only financially, but from a social and emotional and a physical perspective, dealing with COVID-19, right? This is real. We are starting by trying to be really intentional about creating a culture of compassion. So let me break that down.
I love that, culture of compassion, absolutely.
A culture of compassion. So in order to get financial resources, we have to solicit, right? We have to ask people to invest in our work. If we build a culture of compassion, the first question that we ask, Eris, is not, will you give me money, but how are you doing?
Yes.
Are you okay? If I believe that you too are a beneficiary because we are interconnected and interdependent, my first ask should be around your well-being. And so if you are penning an end of the year appeal, if you are working on your canned social media, you need to make sure you are asking your shareholders, your donors, your volunteers, your staff, are you okay? The second thing is you want to retain your writers. We are on the road to recovery, and people have been writing and journeying with us, Eris, before COVID. We have a really difficult time within not-for-profit organizations with retaining donors.
Yeah.
So I want us to retain our writers. And the way that we retain our writers is to be intentional about making sure that we are not so fixated on acquiring new and that we are abandoning, right, the need to connect to those who have been with us
That's right.
on this journey since day one. And so that is going to require for us trying to extend the human resources I've got, right? So I've got to find ways to introduce volunteers quickly and swiftly. And then the third bit, because Eris, I want to ask you a few questions. The third bit on this journey is as you are positioning the destination, because your mission is intended to take people from current state to future state, and you are espousing that your organization has the ability to take us from where we are to a better place. And in doing that, it is important to declare not only the value of your destination, but the values connected to that destination. And so your mission matters, your vision matters, and your values matter. And you don't need to segment out how equity and justice and fairness sits in an independent statement, those elements should rest in your mission, in your vision, and your values. And by doing that, you are going to be deemed as being relevant, essential, responsive to current day needs. So that's some of what we're doing, Eris. Some of what we're doing.
Just a little, just a little light, just that little bit there, Yes, I mean, it's hard work. It's hard work, and we're shifting and pivoting in ways that are unprecedented. And as you know, I'm now in leadership Greater Washington, and
yes,
opened LGW with some really heavy conversations and reflections around structural racism and systemic racism. And, for those of us who've been going through it, and this is kind of where I'm going with these nonprofits, they've been going through it, they've been at this for quite some time. Now there's just an added layer, an added priority and an additional pivot that is being required of them. And so I'm always trying to be respectful of that and honoring the work that they've been doing, because it's not necessarily the nonprofit's job, in my opinion, to make those pivots. I want to help move philanthropy and government, along where they are, because they are with the people. And it's our responsibility to get there as well and to stay there as well. Which is, I love the work that I do.
So speaking of loving the work that you do, can you give?
I think we have like 2 minutes, which is great because I only get to answer one question. No,
so Eris, we know that they're going to be cuts, right? So help us learn how we can be sensitive to where government may be. So when we step forward, right, asking to partner, to collaborate, to secure funding, what is your advice for us? How do we position ourselves for success, whether it's with Serve DC or broadly across district government?
Fantastic question. So a couple things that I try to inform nonprofits when they're coming to the district seeking funding is one, be aware of the priorities. And listen, everything is everything is a priority, but there are different priorities that get elevated and amplified at different points in time due to what's happening for a variety of reasons, right? But being aware of what the priorities are of the administration or the priorities are of the agency that you're going after funding from, so that you are, one, in alignment, never asking you to change up what you are doing or how you do it. But if you're understanding that, right now we have a big focus on what can we do to address the uptick in gun violence, right? We want to make sure that we are leveraging partners and solutions to decrease what is happening right now. It's very problematic. We know that we want to make sure that we have no child who is left behind from an education standpoint due to a digital divide. So I'm always trying to inform organizations, be up on what's current so that you're in alignment and it makes you more competitive. I also try to encourage them to not be discouraged if they do not secure funding. And I think a great way to begin to secure funding from district government is looking at kind of like pipeline. So I'm in the executive office of the mayor's office of community affairs. We issue through our 13 different community affairs offices, more than a dozen different grants that go out. These grants are usually local dollars. They are usually a smaller amount, meaning they may max out at 50,000, somewhere between 5 to 50,000, but they're a great entryway for organizations to understand what it's like to secure funding from district government. You can use that, I say, as like your pipeline to build up to agency funding, where you may receive a grant, 50,000, 150,000, kind of going also, we're saying like being a service provider to an agency like Department of Health and Human Services or Department of Transportation. They use these organizations in different ways. So don't be discouraged, be aligned with the priorities, be up to date with the priorities, but also look for ways that you can get an entrance in do some collaboration. And I know everyone wants funding, but you know, sometimes partnering with the mayor's office gives you even a greater visibility to other businesses or to other donors who may say, oh, wow, I didn't know about that organization. Let me find out a little bit more. So those are some, you know, low-hanging things. And just like with any, I would say donor, it does take some work. It does take some time, but don't be discouraged.
Oh, Eris, that was an excellent way to put a perfect punctuation mark at the end of our conversation. So
yes,
thank you for having me. And it's been an honor to share more about America's Promise Alliance, which I know that you've also been a huge supporter of. So just want to thank you for continuing to be a part of our community and encouraging all the not-for-profit organizations working with youth to join America's Promise at no cost. You can visit our website for more resources and information.
Thank you so very much. You dropped a lot of gems on us. And look, gems, money. Okay, I don't know if that went over well.
Love it.
We
Yes.
appreciate you.
Yes. I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank
So I
you.
think with that, I turn it back over to our amazing Deputy Director, Ms. Dee Dee Squire. Or I'm just coming straight. Oh, they're like, no, we are short on time. You're just going to say thank you and wrap this up. But I will say, I am so thrilled. And, you know, listen, this is the 4th installment. And I said, I'll be so happy when this is over. Oh my goodness, I'm exhausted. We've been working around the clock. But it's absolutely been worth every single minute, every single hour that we've put into making sure that we can have a successful Ready for Recovery. And now I'm sad that it's actually coming to a close. But one thing that is great about this series is that all 4 sessions have been recorded. They are all available online, and I encourage everyone to follow Serve DC at Serve DC on Instagram, Facebook. You could always go to our website. And with that, I must say a big special thank you, not just to today's panelists, not just to my one-on-one with Tysley, but to the entire Serve DC team, to our amazing content partners, Good Insight, to our production team, PBCI, who's been with us since day one. And of course, I am thrilled that we got to close today out with my amazing chair, Brandon Andrews. And some of you guys, I'm gonna drop this little jewel for you. He is actually affiliated with Shark Tank. So look him up if you got a business and you want to figure out how you get on there and pitch yourself to the world. Brandon is your guy. So I'm just going to blow him up right now. But this was really just, again, reinforcing our values, Mayor Bowser's commitment to making sure that all of our different industries, from the business community to our not-for-profit community to our residents, are just part of this process of building back a better, stronger, more resilient, vibrant, and equitable DC. And there's ways for you to continue to support this work as a volunteer, to support this work as a partner. And I just want you to know that Serve DC is here to make sure that we are all serving DC together. So with that, thank you so much. Have an amazing afternoon and enjoy your day. Bye-bye.